Today, I'm with Micah Woods, an inclusion warrior. Michael has been working in the sports industry for about 15 years, and for the past 11 years with Swimming Australia in an inclusion and para pathway roles, and is currently employed as the Move It Australia and Inclusion Project Manager. Through his business, Inclusive Sport Design, Michael Woodsy, or Micah as he's known as, provides resources, training and consulting services to help support organisations make inclusion happen. He is also the director of the Inclusion Club and is owner of Impact Leaders e-learning, providing online learning solutions to various sectors. So I've known Michael a while and we love talking about inclusion. So I'm really pleased to have you on part of the system today, Michael. How are you going?
Yeah, really, really good. And it's my pleasure to be here. I'm looking forward to having a really good chat and talking about some stuff that we're all really passionate about and spending a lot of time on, which is good that we're spending a lot of time on this stuff. The world needs it at the moment, I reckon.
For sure. And I think when I think of you, I always think of somebody who's on the path, and trying to help others maybe that are less fortunate or, disadvantaged. And so, yeah, always good to chat. So let's get into it. Micah, what does well-being mean to you?
Oh, look, it's a big idea, right? Well-being. And a lot of people, I think, kind of go straight to it's about, being physically healthy and active and, eating well and, doing yoga and juicing and stuff, right?
Yeah.
But for me, it's probably it's more than that. And I think it's kind of this whole sense of, the whole self and being kind of not just physically or psychologically well and healthy, but also being kind of content in what you're doing in your life and knowing that, basically knowing what you're doing with your life and where you're heading and having that kind of contentment and general happiness about where you're at. And so well-being is kind of this bigger kind of thing that is basically how you feel about yourself in the world. And of course, being healthy, physically healthy and mentally healthy is part of that, but it's not for me, it's not the only thing to well-being. So it's kind of, that's kind of how I see well-being as an idea and how I kind of look at it from my life, I guess.
Yeah. So it's like that introspection, it's how you're feeling about yourself a lot of the time.
Yeah. And I think, having that kind of sense of purpose in life, and knowing that you're in a good place, physically, mentally, socially, work, family, all of those things are kind of, bundled in together, I reckon.
And because we can be so hard on ourselves, can't we? I'm not doing this, or, I'm not exercising. And so that contentness of just being okay with being is, I think, important. Yeah.
And I reckon since I've become a dad as well, the how the people around me are also, I kind of bundle that into kind of my sense of well-being too. Because, as a dad, you got, if your children are doing well and they're healthy and they're happy and they're progressing and developing and stuff, then you kind of take that as a reflection of what you're doing in the world. And that becomes part of your sense of self and your sense of purpose and happiness and things as well. So, it's not just kind of how am I in my own little bubble? It's, how is the world around me kind of part of my own experience as well. So I didn't have that sense until I became a dad. I don't reckon. I was very much about, if I'm healthy and I'm happy, that's all that matters. But now it's actually I'm second to a whole bunch of other stuff. And if the other stuff's doing good, then I'm doing good. So that's kind of for me part of this idea of well-being as well.
Yeah, well, you've got more responsibility now. It's not just looking after you, is it? So
I reckon so they keep telling me.
Yeah, I bet it changes your perspective, for sure. And what are some of the things you do then to look after your well-being? I know you've just moved house, and that can be, I think, one of the most stressful things that you can do, I think.
Yeah. Luckily, I'm pretty well practiced with moving house. I've done it a fair few times in my life, including interstate, which I wouldn't recommend to anyone. But how do I look after my well-being? Probably not the poster boy for well-being, So there's plenty of things I know I'm not doing well. Like I'm not active enough. I know that. I don't drink enough water. I drink too much booze. I sit down too long every day. But so don't take advice from me, people. But I guess some of the stuff that I'm kind of mindful of and try and work on is diet. Like I do try to kind of manage the things that I eat, for health reasons. I don't eat a lot of things like red meat, not because I'm vegetarian or vegan or don't like red meat. I love a steak. It's just, too much, has an impact. And so I try to manage that. And we, as a family, we kind of eat a fairly veggie based kind of diet regularly. And that's, again, it's not for anything it's not a philosophical thing. It's just, it's better for your health. But I guess for me, the stuff that really kind of is front of mind is like I work from home. I've worked from home for the last 4 or 5 years. So COVID impacted me. The only negative impact for COVID was that I had more people in my home office than I would have otherwise had. So the working from home thing is kind of just my day to day. And so I've got a stand up desk. I try and move as much as I can. I try to take regular breaks throughout the day. Don't overload my schedule. I've got blocks in my schedule where I don't do meetings or this sort of thing. I actually have time for deep work and time for meetings and time for different projects that I'm working on. So I try and manage the time management stuff a little bit. Otherwise, with everything that's going on, you kind of can get overloaded and there's no separation between work life, home life, and everything else that you're doing. So that's kind of a really big thing that I try and work on. I'm not perfect and I know that, but it's something that I do focus on. And I guess finding time for myself is hard as well. So I do that in a few different ways, taking a little bit of time at the end of the day before, going to pick up my son from daycare or whatever. But I've also kind of built my work life around how I want it to be over the last few years, right? So I kind of went from the 9 to 5 working for an employer into the kind of self, employed kind of world. And that was a kind of a deliberate process that came with stress and challenge and risk, but it's given me this real flexibility. So it means I can do things on my own terms. I have a day a week off where I spend with my son. He doesn't go to school one day a week. So we hang out, we do swimming lessons and go to the park and have coffees and that sort of stuff. So building that into my week is really good. Gives me, respite from the work and that sort of stuff. But I guess if I was going to give any advice, if not that this is an advice giving session, but if I was, sleep. Oh my God, sleep is life, right? So I've got like the most expensive mattress I could afford. I've got the best pillow I can afford. And I like try and make sure that sleep is at least regular and good. And that makes a massive difference, especially when you're running around after a toddler and you've got everything else going on. So that's probably a big one. And I'm working on less devices before bed.
Yeah.
I'm working on it.
Yeah.
I'm not perfect. It's hard, but it's something that I'm trying to work on because I know that it does make a difference. So there's a few things. There's probably other stuff that I try to do, but like I said, I'm not perfect. I'm not the best at managing my well-being.
Yeah. Oh, well, I love the vulnerability there that you're showing and being, honest around it. I don't think we're all the finished article, are we?
That's right.
We've all got things we probably want to keep improving on. But them last two things, I think you talked about there, Michael, around, devices before bed and, you're looking at screens and it's difficult then to get to sleep and people don't realize how important sleep is for restoration, and, for just being well. Maybe having a room that's blacked out with no lights and, maybe not, and even an alarm that wakes you up, which is so loud, so it shocks you to get up. So there's a lot in that. But in terms of your, I suppose, lifelong passion for safe, fair and inclusive sport, and, I see the work that you're doing, which is incredible. But where's this passion come from?
That's a really interesting question because, you know, I'm the standard white cisgendered male middle class private school educated university educated guy, right?
Mm.
So I don't kind of come from, I guess, a background of lived experience of discrimination or lived
Yeah.
experience of any kind of disadvantage. You know, I've had a pretty privileged life, and you know, more than okay about acknowledging and accepting that. But I guess, you know, I had a pretty egalitarian upbringing, pretty liberal upbringing.
Mm.
So fairness and equity has been kind of just something that's in the background of my kind of growing up years, I guess. But I guess sport has also been there. So I started playing sport when I was 5, like a lot of other kids. I didn't actually officially stop playing sport until like my mid-20s. And only because I just had an injury I couldn't be bothered getting over. And so so sport's always been there. So I've had those lessons of sport, but like you say, a lifelong passion, it's really only been, you know, 15 years or so where this stuff has actually been really important and something that I've really focused on, because I went through all my sporting career, didn't have any real exposure to, you know, disability options or
Mm.
what it meant for multicultural participation. I just didn't have that
Mm.
experience. I had my experience as a white middle class kid playing soccer. And so I guess my first exposure was I went to the Paralympic Games in Sydney, and I went and saw CP football, and I went and saw para swimming and wheelchair rugby and wheelchair basketball, and the CP football soccer obviously was something that stuck with me, right? Because I was playing soccer at the time. I was going to play for the Socceroos and all that. And I saw these guys with CP out there just nailing it and skillful and fit and strong and doing things that you just would assume a high level footballer can do. And I was like, oh my God, they can do it. Like, this is really amazing. I've never seen them before. And of course I was like, well, why shouldn't they be doing that? That makes sense. This is amazing.
Yeah.
And so I guess I had that experience in the back of my mind, but I went through all my studies and inclusion wasn't part of that experience. And then I got an internship at the end of my degree in the disability sport education program. And that kind of was my learning experience of what inclusion was about and how to deliver sort of training and information education around that stuff and what programs can look like. And then I kind of stumbled into a job with Swimming Australia, looking after disability inclusion work, which evolved into Paralympic work, which evolved into kind of strategic work. And, you know, 11 years later, I'm still on the books at Swimming, doing stuff there. And so I guess I just went from saying, you know, I had a really great experience playing sport and it's something really important to me. So it makes sense that everyone should have that opportunity, and why not me? Or, you know, why, you know, what, there's nothing stopping me from being an enabler of that. And so it's just been something that I've stuck with. I found a passion for it. I realized I was able to achieve goals through it. And the outcomes are really, really important. And the outcomes are bigger than sport itself and sport participation, which I think keeps me going with it. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. And you talk about the swimming stuff. Like, what was some of the key learnings that you've had with the work that you've done through Swimming Australia around inclusion?
Yeah, that it takes time. I kind of went in naively to my first role with them thinking, yeah, give me 5 years. I'm going to do myself out of a job. You know, we're going to be, you know, world leaders in this stuff and, you know, going to, you know, make all this change in what I thought was a long time, 5 years, right? You know, 10, 11 years later, we've absolutely, there's been progress made, but there's still plenty of work to do. And I found that it actually requires, I guess, a leader, someone who can drive the agenda and do the work, because there's work to do when it comes to this stuff, particularly at a kind of a national sport organization level. You know, there's a lot of strategy and advice giving and driving and pushing that's required to keep things moving, and also to bed down things in systemic elements of the organization, like in policy, in practices, in culture, that you need someone driving right? So any cultural element of an organization needs a champion, a driver, or people to do the work to keep the momentum going. Inclusion's no different. And so I realized that, doing yourself out of a job was actually not the end game. It was actually evolving the maturity and the ownership of inclusion and inclusive practice in an organization, but driven by people who are passionate and know what they're talking about and can move it forward. So that's probably been a major one. But the other one is that it's about people. And initially, and a lot of times, even still with various stakeholders and partners, a lot of times people go, oh, we don't have the funding to do inclusion work. We can't go outside of core business because we don't have the funding. And it's not about funding. It's actually about people. And if you can engage people to be engaged in the inclusion agenda, and do the things that make a difference in their day-to-day work, then you actually get better outcomes than if you got a $100,000 grant to go and run a program. So a lot of my time and energy is actually spent on trying to deal with that, and less on, well, how much money do you have and what can we spend it on? Because it doesn't necessarily achieve the long-term outcome that you're looking for, which is a culture shift. So they're probably the two biggest things that I've taken away. Obviously, I've developed a whole range of kind of experiences and ideas around how to best do some of that stuff, and how to best design programs, and how to best pitch for funding, and how to best influence things within an organization. But I think those two other items are the top line learnings over the years.
Yeah. I've just put myself on mute because there's some guy who's cutting the grass outside. I don't know if you can hear it, but it is so loud.
Perfect timing.
I know it is. But I think you're right. Inclusion, it's not an initiative, is it? It's a mindset. And, the cultural piece around, the people and the language that people are using, and, are we aware of how we are being, and how that's being interpreted, I think is really, really interesting. So sounds like you've done some great work there, and that continues. And I suppose the other part to the work that you do, Michael, is your stuff with the inclusive sports design and the inclusion club. And I know you've got some terrific resources with the e-learning stuff. Can you just tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, so I guess inclusive sport design came about in around about 20. Well, it was an idea that's bubbling away in my head for a good 5 years, right? So it's not an overnight sort of thing that came about, but it came from this kind of what I was seeing across the industry, not just here in Australia, but internationally as well, was I guess this kind of ebbing and flowing of commitment and resources and leadership and things like that around from within the sports sector, in terms of whether it's the leading government agencies, or whether it's the NSOs or whatever. There's just this ebbing of flowing of investment and commitment and strategy around inclusion. And I just was constantly kind of finding, not roadblocks, but finding where something was available at one point, it's not there anymore to support the work that I'm trying to do, or where these resources were in place, now they've not because the funding's gone, or the person who was driving it's gone, or whatever. And so there was this kind of need and desire to sort of go, oh, well, let's just create something that is consistent, keep stuff in one place, freely available information and support that's up to date, based on research and best practice and things like that, and put it out there. And that kind of turned into a bit of a consultancy type of opportunity as well, right? So then I thought, oh, maybe I can do this as a business. And so that sort of set me down the work for yourself kind of trail. But the end game with inclusive sport design is really provide a platform, deliver resources that are accessible and available and usable, and provide services that go beyond theory and actually put things into practice for organizations that is simple and easy to implement. Because stuff that I was finding over the years from in swimming and in other sports was particularly at club level, basically they were saying, tell me what to do. Show me the way to do this and we will do it. And more theory and data and research doesn't help someone necessarily enact change. They might know more, but they're not necessarily going to do more. And so that was the focus, is how do we help people do more in this space. So it's all very much about being practical and changing what we do at club or even within organizations in terms of what we do. So that's that. And then the kind of the e-learning stuff actually evolved out of some projects and things that I was doing for inclusive sport design. I was I sort of teamed up with Play by the Rules and was helping Peter Downs at Play by the Rules build some of the online courses for them. So if anyone out there has done any of the recent mini courses and short courses that have come out of Play by the Rules, I've been behind the scenes on some of that. So that turned into a real kind of niche little thing. Then COVID hit, and e-learning has just become an online kind of engagement has just become this massive need, and people didn't necessarily have the tools and resources to do that. So I was like, all right, well, this is an opportunity. Let's double down, start a new business during the first lockdown and go from there. So the e-learning stuff has come out of that, but it's the same intention in terms of the work that I do is how do I influence and support and provide tools to people to do that in a meaningful, practical way. So, yeah.
Yeah, and how can people get their hands on some of those e-learning, your courses and stuff? Can you share some of that?
Yeah, so on inclusive sport design at the moment, there's a few courses there now. One's very much about practical things that clubs can do. There's a free course around how to write an inclusion commitment statement, which is kind of like step one for anyone that's looking to sort of express a commitment to inclusion. And then there's an action planning course available there as well. And that's if you go to inclusivesportdesign.com and just follow the menu links to the ISD Academy, and you'll find it all there. There's more on the way. I've got some plans. There's a couple of little masterclasses as well there. If you're interested in things like, there's one there on the impact of friendship on inclusive sport for people with disability, which in the world of COVID, social connection is a real issue. And there's some really great stuff happening out in the world. And I've actually teamed up with an expert from the USA for that masterclass. And then there's another one there around kind of measuring your impact, which I teamed up with a young guy who works with the Sixers, Sydney Sixers cricket team, who's doing some great work in the LGBT space particularly. So there's a couple of little masterclasses. So there's a few different options there and more on the way. But if anyone's kind of looking at e-learning solutions, then impactleaders.online, they can check out what we've got on offer there. LMS, course design, all that sort of stuff, so.
I'm just going to close this door. Just give me 1 second with this noise.
You might need to edit that part out.
Woo! How funny.
Oh. You're lucky, actually. We have a flock of cockatoos that have been getting around here lately, and I've got the doors open, and they sit just on the little roof here screeching. So that happened in a meeting earlier today. So luckily they're not here at the moment.
Yeah, it's working from home, isn't it? It's all these little things. So yeah, fantastic work, Michael, and yeah, I'd encourage anybody to go and check it out. I know there's some really great tools there for sports clubs, particularly, but any organisation wanting to kind of delve into inclusion and diversity, and some real great resources there, which is really cool. Obviously, one of my passions is around health and trying to reduce chronic disease, particularly in disadvantaged areas. But as you know, 1 in 2 Australians have got a chronic disease, and we don't seem to be getting any better. So, if you could nudge the system in one way to improve the well-being of Australians, Michael, what would that be?
Just one.
Well, you can have if you've got 2 good ones, I'll let you have it.
Look, for me, and the NDIS, right? So for me, the NDIS is a massive opportunity for health and wellbeing outcomes for people with disability and other chronic conditions. But sport, traditional sport, mainstream sport, is difficult at the moment under the way the system's operating. It's a difficult nut to crack to get sport-specific activities and services kind of easily funded within the NDIS. But alongside that, we know that sport can support the outcomes that the NDIS seeks to get for people on plans, right? So for me, a massive nudge would be to, break down those bureaucratic and kind of rules-based systems that are preventing access and support to sport for people with disability, and make it easier, because the outcomes are there, whether it's physical health, whether it's life skills, whether it's whatever the goals of the participant are, whether it's access to employment pathways. It's all there to be found in sport.
And just when you're saying, break those barriers down, like, what do you actually mean by that? Is it like red tape? Is it the bureaucracy of it? Like,
yeah, look, it's a combination of the design of the system of how to go about the funding planning process and those sort of things. It's also about the understanding of people within the NDIS system of the value of sport and how we can actually achieve the outcomes that people might be looking for as their life goals. And so I think there's a few kind of elements in there that need to be addressed. And I think the key one is just that understanding and awareness of the benefits and the outcomes that sport participation, inclusive mainstream sport participation, can bring to people, which from a cost benefit point of view, reduces the burden on the health system. If you've got more active, healthy people, they're less likely to go into allied health services and systems and supports, because they're getting those outcomes through running around on a footy park on Saturday morning and training 2 nights a week, or whatever it is, swimming up and down a pool 4 nights a week or whatever. Right. So, so those things are probably an area to start, but there are some rules-based issues and sort of bureaucratic-based issues within the system itself that probably need to be examined to make it easier for sport-specific activities to be funded and supported through the NDIS. So that's kind of a big one. And then the other one is something that is a bit of a bugbear over time, is the funding models that we have in, particularly in sport funding around diverse populations, disadvantaged populations, is it tends to be very siloed. It might be for this target market, might be for that target market. It might come from federal government, but it might not be available at state level, or might only be local. So I guess a more consistent approach to addressing target population groups within funding models would be useful. But I'm not sure how easily that one's going to shift, given our federated government model and political agendas shifting every few years. So that's 2 of the top ones. There's probably plenty more.
Well, you're definitely taking on the big issues. With the NDIS and I mean, I think the philosophy behind it, empowering people to make decisions on, where they want to spend their funds in terms of their health and well-being is fantastic. But it's a little complicated, and that's just from someone kind of on the outside, So, but I think we're definitely moving in the right direction with it, which is good. And in terms of the work that you do, Michael, so obviously you're consultancy and you're working with Swimming Australia, but where do you see yourself personally within the system, and how you're wanting to kind of contribute and influence it?
It's such an interesting question, and it's probably not something that I spend a huge amount of time thinking about, but I think not until very recently, perhaps, but certainly sort of early in my work and career and things like that, I kind of had this idea that, I've got this experience, I'm helping these organizations do these things, so therefore I'm an expert. And so therefore I, position myself as the advisor, the expert. And that's really problematic, right? Because I don't have the lived experience that's required to be an expert on disability inclusion or LGBTI inclusion, or any number of issues that we're trying to address through this kind of diversity and inclusion movement, right? So I guess where I see myself now is more of a influencer, I guess, and not your social media influencer, but like I see myself as someone who can or is positioned to help people make the decisions and take the actions that make a difference and move the dial. And so that means a lot of times I'll be the background person, or the background influence, or I'll be the one kind of being the check and balance in terms of policy or looking at strategy and those sort of things, but not the front decision maker, and not the kind of expert, as in I'm going to tell you how this is to be done, because I don't have all the experiences, and particularly lived experiences, that is required to be a genuine expert in any particular field of diversity and inclusion. So I'm a nudger, an influencer, I guess, an advisor, and I guess a strategizer, and taking the more complex and more kind of theoretical side of what inclusion and diversity is all about, and making that really practical for people to implement, and kind of pointing them in the right direction, is, I guess, how I see myself in the system, as it relates to kind of D&I and sport. And that's kind of where the e-learning stuff has evolved from too, because it's the same kind of thing, right? You're providing the tools and solutions and process and advice on how to influence your audience or your student group or your workforce through digital education processes and systems. So that's kind of how I guess I see it. And the other kind of thing is I can kind of systemize some of the needs in the background. So I've done a lot of work in things like classification, for example, in parasport, and sport pathways, and how do we build better sport performance pathways for particularly people with disability that serve our engagement objectives, but also support high performance outcomes, in that we need highly successful athletes at the end of the pipeline, and all the elements that connect with that. So I see myself as being able to bring that big picture together in a way that's effective and aligned to outcome, with the inclusion lens always. So.
And your answer there doesn't surprise me, because you have got a lot of humility, but I know that you are one of the go-to, experts, if you will. I know you don't like to use that term, but around inclusion and, diversity, and that, you're talking about those pathways for, people with disability, because you've obviously got that lens, and you've demonstrated it over years with, the projects that you've run. But I can see you in the background, just making those little, pulling, just trying to support people and enable them to make the right decisions, or just to make them think about things a little bit differently, and through a mindset of what does it mean to be inclusive, fully inclusive, so that we're trying to provide the most support as well to those most in need, and whether that's policy or strategy or culture, they're all important. And I'll move on to my last question, and this is just from kind of speaking to you, where do you think we sit as a nation in being inclusive, to and I'm looking at it more from society, and it's interesting, coming from England to a different country, and it has a different culture, and even language and things of how we communicate to each other. But where do you think we're at, and where would you like to get to?
Oh, do you know what we as Australians, we say we're better than we are about a lot of things, right? It's kind of we like to say that we bat well above our average, and we do more than we're probably expected to do, right? And I think in this inclusion and diversity space, we're probably in that same mindset. In some spaces, we're really quite advanced, particularly from like a Paralympic high performance system and Paralympic pathway system point of view across many sports now, but with a lot of work to do in other sports, compared to a lot of other nations. I think we're probably on par in a lot of ways with the British system when it comes to Paralympic sport. if you think more broadly, I think you just read the headlines from the last week from the AFL and some of the challenges that has been going on there, not just in the Aboriginal and Indigenous First Nation space, but also in the LGBT space as well. There's challenges going on there, and while there's a lot of kind of positive stuff happening, there's some genuine challenges still kind of below the surface, I guess. Not just in AFL, in a lot of sports, and so I think we're doing a lot of the right things. There's still a lot of work to do in terms of really genuinely bedding down in our institutions what it really means to provide an inclusive, welcoming, safe place for people to participate and excel and grow in a sport. And so I think on a global sense, we're probably doing a lot better generally than a lot of other countries. But there are probably some learnings we can take from elsewhere that we need to apply here in Australia. Noting, of course, that like Australia is quite a unique community, a unique culture and demography in terms of our population. We have a really multicultural population. We have a really strong Indigenous culture with a really challenging history attached to it. And we have, we've made some real advancements when it comes to things like marriage equality and things like that, but we weren't leading and it wasn't easy to get there. And there is still kind of voices in our community that doesn't necessarily support things like marriage equality and the advancement of LGBTI inclusion and things in society. And so the trans and gender diverse participation in sport is a continuing challenge. Whilst many sports are trying to tackle it, it's still not where it probably needs to be. So I think as a scorecard, we're probably a 7 out of 10. We need to get to a 10 across the board, I think. And I think it's going to take a bit more in sport. It's going to take a bit more reframing of how we define sport itself in order for some of those doors to be opened for other parts of the community, because we're still stuck in this idea that the reason you participate in sport is to progress. And to become elite. And so the system is designed, and therefore the rules are designed, and the policies are designed around that idea, when research tells us that the nation is going to be better off if more people can be more active more often. And that means everyone, which means the model of sport maybe isn't fit for purpose at a certain level across the board. So the sports that can figure that out the quickest will be the most to advance when it comes to inclusion, I think. Because it just takes that change.
Yeah, and terminology is important, isn't it? It's not all about sport, and it's the social side of it, and just getting people more active and walking. That's going to bring about massive changes in the well-being of Australians. But I think that was a balanced scorecard from you, so I'll take a 7. And obviously there's always work to do, but
there's always work to do, and I don't think it'll stop because our community will continue to change. The challenges in that community will continue to change. The cultural expectations of people will continue to change as well. And so we've always got to strive for better, strive for more. And I think a inclusive society in general is a stronger one, and sport's a reflection of that. So we can, rest assured we're going to have work for a while.
For sure. And it's really challenging our assumptions and, trying to look at it from different people's perspectives, isn't it? Because we all see the world through a certain lens. But we know it takes people like yourself, Michael, to keep banging that drum and reminding people around, how important inclusion is. And, it doesn't matter where you're from or what your background is, you have the right to be involved in activity and sport. Yeah, I just wanted to acknowledge all the work that you do, and for the sector and supporting our industry, which is awesome. And is there anything else you wanted to share?
No. Anyone listening and watching, get out there, make inclusion happen. It's not hard. If you need help, we're here. There's plenty of people out there who are working in this space and doing really good things. And it's just about getting in and having a crack and starting. That's how things change.
Yeah. Well said. All right. Well, I'd like to wish you all the best for the rest of the year, and I hope to catch up with you soon in person, Michael.
Yeah, absolutely. Looking forward to coming to see that new centre that you've been working on. It sounds top notch, best in show, world class. So looking forward to seeing it in action and all the other work you're doing as well. Thanks heaps.
Yeah, no worries. All right. Catch you soon.
Thanks, Dave.